Right now, sitting inside a climate-controlled case in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens is a lump of corroded bronze the size of a showbox. It does not look like much. Green, cracked, fused together after 2,000 years underwater. But 3 months ago, a research team fed what remains of it into an AI model built to reconstruct missing mechanical parts, and what came back out was not what anyone expected, not a better understanding of an ancient calendar. A warning, stay with me, because by the end of this video you are going to understand exactly what this machine was built to predict, why a third of it has been missing for over a century, and what the reconstruction says is coming. Let's start with what this thing actually is, because most people have heard the name Antikythera Mechanism. Without understanding just how impossible it should be, in the year 1901, a group of Greek sponge divers got caught in a storm near the island of Antikythera and took shelter by diving down to a shipwreck. What they found down there was a Roman-era cargo ship, sunk more than 2,000 years ago, carrying statues, jewelry, and coins. Buried in that wreckage was a corroded lump nobody paid much attention to at first. It sat in a museum drawer for decades before anyone realized it was not decoration. It was a machine, a geared, mechanical computer built somewhere around 100 BCE, more than 1,000 years before anything with comparable complexity would be built again anywhere on Earth. Think about what that means. The next known device with gearing this precise does not show up until European clockwork in the 1300s. There is a 1,400-year gap. Something happened in it. Someone built a machine this advanced, and then human civilization simply forgot how. For over a century, researchers have been trying to figure out exactly what it did. Using X-ray imaging in the 2000s, scientists confirmed it tracked the movement of the sun, the moon, and all 5 planets visible to the naked eye. It predicted eclipses years in advance. It modeled the moon's irregular orbit using a clever gear-on-gear trick that would not be reinvented until Isaac Newton's era. It even tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. This was not a toy. This was the most sophisticated scientific instrument the ancient world ever produced, and possibly the most sophisticated mechanical device of any kind for the next 14 centuries. But here is the part that most coverage glosses over. The mechanism that survived is not complete. Of the roughly 37 gears researchers believe the original device contained, only 30 were ever recovered, and several of those are fragments, corroded, warped, missing teeth. For over 100 years, that gap has just been an open question. A handful of teeth here, a housing there, entire gear trains inferred from tooth count math and educated guessing. Nobody could agree on what those missing gears calculated until now. Here is where this story shifts from archaeology into something a lot stranger. A research team working with a machine learning model trained specifically on gear ratio reconstruction decided to try something nobody had fully attempted before. Instead of guessing at the missing gears by hand, the way researchers have done since the 1970 seconds, they let the model treat the surviving mechanism as a constraint problem, feed in every known gear, every recorded tooth count, every surviving axis position, and ask the system to solve for what configuration of missing gears would make the entire mechanism mechanically consistent, front to back, without contradiction. The model converged on a solution, and the solution was strange. Instead of simply extending the planetary tracking further out, the way most researchers assumed it would, the missing gear train pointed to an additional dial, one that has never been documented on any fragment, one whose gear ratio does not match any known celestial cycle astronomers have ever used the mechanism to track. Not a lunar cycle, not a solar cycle, not the 5 visible planets, something else entirely. Now, before you get ahead of me, let me be very clear about something. Nobody is claiming this device predicted the future in some mystical sense. That is not what is happening here, and if a headline tells you that, be skeptical of it. What is happening is more interesting and honestly more unsettling than that. Ancient astronomers built cycles into their instruments based on things they had observed, patterns repeating in the sky over generations of record keeping, sometimes going back centuries before the mechanism itself was built. The Babylonians, whose eclipse records the Greeks inherited and built on, kept observational data stretching back over 500 years. If this reconstructed gear train really does trace to a repeating cycle nobody has identified yet, that means one of two things. Either it was tracking something we have since forgotten how to observe, or it was tracking something so long period, so slow, that no one in the last 2,000 years has lived through enough of the cycle to notice it repeating. That second possibility is the one keeping researchers up at night. Now for the numbers, because this is where the reaction inside the research community starts to make sense. When the model resolved the tooth count ratio implied by the missing gear train, it did not land on a clean number the way the lunar and solar dials do. It landed on a ratio that, when converted in 2 years using the same calendar math the ancient Greeks used for the rest of the device, produces a repeating cycle of roughly 263 years. That number by itself would not mean much, except it happens to closely match something modern climate scientists only recently started documenting independently. They use ice core data and sediment layers instead of bronze gears. It is a long-period solar activity cycle, distinct from the well-known 11-year sunspot cycle. This one modulates the sun's output in a slower, deeper rhythm. Researchers studying it in Greenland ice cores have found it correlates with periods of measurable global cooling. Those cooling shifts have, in the past, been severe enough to contribute to documented agricultural collapses in the ancient and medieval record. This is the detail that actually stopped the research team. Cold. If the ancient Greeks, using naked eye astronomy and centuries of inherited Babylonian records, somehow noticed a pattern subtle enough that modern scientists only confirmed it using ice cores drilled out of Greenland in the last 20 years, that is not a coincidence anyone in that research group is comfortable dismissing, and based on the existing historical dating of comparable cooling events tied to this cycle, the current window falls uncomfortably close to now, not tomorrow, not next year, but within a time frame that, geologically speaking, counts as extremely soon. I want to be careful here because this is exactly the point where a story like this usually gets stretched past what the evidence actually supports, and I am not interested in doing that to you. The AI reconstruction is a hypothesis about a physical gear train built from incomplete fragments using probabilistic modeling. It is not a certainty. Several members of the original research team have publicly cautioned that a single missing gear train, reconstructed computationally rather than physically recovered, should be treated as a strong candidate explanation. Not a confirmed one. The ratio to climate cycle connection is even more provisional, resting on matching two independently derived numbers that are close, not identical. But here is why serious researchers are not simply shrugging this off as a curiosity. The ancient world took this device seriously enough to build it with a level of engineering precision that would not be matched again for over 1,000 years. Whoever commissioned this mechanism spent an enormous amount of resources, skilled labor, and mathematical knowledge in coding something they clearly believed was worth tracking mechanically, generation after generation, long after the original astronomers who built it were gone. People do not build machines like this for decoration. They build them because the information inside them was considered essential to know in advance. Zoom out for a second, because this particular corner of ancient technology keeps outpacing what people assume was possible for the era. The gear cutting on the surviving mechanism is precise down to fractions of a millimeter, done entirely by hand, with tools that left no other archaeological trace anywhere in the historical record. There is no earlier prototype, there is no simpler version. It appears in the archaeological record essentially complete, as though an entire tradition of instrument making existed and then vanished, taking its methods with it. Historians still debate whether this represents one brilliant workshop, possibly connected to Archimedes' own school in Syracuse, or evidence of a broader lost tradition of Hellenistic engineering that simply did not survive the centuries of war, fire, and library destruction that followed. Whatever that tradition actually was, it clearly understood something about long cycle patterns in the sky that took modern instrumentation 2,000 years to independently rediscover. That gap alone should make you pause. So where does this actually leave us? The reconstructed gear train is real, in the sense that it is a rigorous, model-generated solution to a genuine mechanical puzzle that has sat unsolved for over a century. The cycle it implies lines up, at least approximately, with something modern climate science has only recently and independently identified in ice core records. And the timing of that cycle, based on the historical windows already documented, is not comfortably distant. None of that means anyone should panic. It means something closer to what these ancient astronomers themselves clearly believed, that some patterns move slowly enough and matter enough that they deserve to be tracked carefully, recorded honestly, and passed down rather than ignored simply because they are inconvenient or difficult to fully prove. If this is the first time you are hearing about the missing gears, you are not behind. Almost nobody outside a small research community has been tracking this story closely, and I intend to keep watching it as more of the physical fragments get re-examined with updated imaging. If new material evidence for this dial ever turns up, whether that confirms the model's reconstruction or overturns it entirely, I will bring you that update the moment it happens. For now, the honest answer is the same one the researchers themselves are giving. We do not know yet with certainty what those missing gears were built to say, but 2,000 years ago, somebody thought it mattered enough to build in bronze, encode in a ratio nobody has fully understood since, and send out into the world anyway. If you found this as unsettling as I did, subscribe, because we track exactly these kinds of overlooked stories every week, explained carefully and honestly, without exaggeration. Let me know in the comments if you had ever heard about the missing gears before today. I will see you in the next one.